Beneath the calm surface of an ordinary suburban life, a storm was brewing that would shock a community to its core. Isabella Guzman was the girl next door, a seemingly typical teenager with the usual quirks and challenges. She lived in a modest home with her mother, Yoon Mi, and her stepfather, Ryan. To outsiders, their family dynamics mirrored the everyday ebb and flow of parental guidance and teenage resistance. Isabella attended school, engaged in social activities, and experienced the roller coaster of adolescent emotions. Yet despite these normal teenage pursuits, there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate the household. It was a tension that went beyond the typical arguments over curfews and homework. This was a deeper, more troubled connection between Isabella and her mother, Yoon Mi, a relationship strained by unspoken grievances and misunderstandings. As the days passed, the friction between mother and daughter grew more palpable. The arguments became frequent, the silences longer. It was as though each interaction was laced with a residue of resentment, building silently under the guise of normalcy. This wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was a growing tumult of emotions, poorly understood and barely managed. Neighbors would often hear raised voices attributing it to the usual family squabbles. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more complex. What appeared to be typical teenage rebellion was a veneer for something far more ominous. It started with an email, an eerie prelude to a night of horror. The digital message, tapped out in the quiet of a seemingly normal evening, carried with it a weight that would soon crush a family's world. Isabella Guzman, a teenager whose life had been marked by outward calm, sent a chilling communication to her mother, Yoon Mi. The contents? A stark and unsettling threat, shrouded in the guise of adolescent rebellion. To an onlooker, this might have seemed like just another bout of teenage angst, a phase, a fleeting storm of emotions. But beneath the surface, the waters were more treacherous. Ryan, Isabella's stepfather, recalls the period with a heavy heart. He witnessed the growing tension, the silent meals, the doors slamming shut more frequently. Yet, like many, he hoped it was a phase that would pass, a tempest that would calm without leaving scars. The family dynamics, already taut, were further strained by this email. Isabella's words were a harbinger, a dark cloud looming ominously over their household. However, these signs were met with dismissal, attributed to a phase of hormonal tumult rather than the buildup of a deep-seated animosity. As the days inched closer to the tragic discovery, the household sat on a ticking time bomb of resentment and misunderstood emotions. Ryan's insights paint a picture of a family caught in the deceptive calm before an inevitable storm. Little did they know these written words were just the beginning of a catastrophic unraveling. A regular evening shattered by a discovery so brutal, it was beyond comprehension. Ryan had returned from work, a day like any other, marked by the mundane tasks and minor triumphs that fill the hours of a typical Wednesday. The house, usually bustling with the sounds of family life, was unsettlingly silent. As he hung his coat and called out, expecting a response from Yoon Mi, the quiet gnawed at him with a chilling unease. Stepping into the kitchen, Ryan noticed the remnants of an unfinished meal, a pot still warm on the stove, signaling that Yoon Mi had been there not long before. A pang of worry struck him as he called out again, his voice echoing through the empty halls. The silence, thick and heavy, seemed to pulse with ominous foreboding. His search led him upstairs, where the door to the bathroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dim hallway. Pushing the door open, the scene that met his eyes froze him in place. Yoon Mi, his beloved wife, lay lifeless on the bathroom floor, her body bearing the terrible marks of a violent struggle. The walls, splattered with stark accusing stains of red, told a silent, gruesome tale. Overcome with shock and grief, Ryan's trembling hands fumbled to dial 911. The operator's voice, calm and steady, seemed distant as he struggled to articulate the horror before him. Police sirens cut through the suburban quietude within minutes, piercing the veil of disbelief that had enveloped the house. Detectives and forensic teams moved swiftly, cordoning off the area as a crime scene. Each officer, from seasoned veterans to the newly minted, felt the weight of the grim tableau they'd stepped into. They moved methodically, collecting evidence, photographing the scene, their professionalism a thin veil over the palpable heartbreak of the task. As the sirens wailed, a question hung in the air. How could a daughter turn against her own mother with such ferocity? In the interrogation room, a different Isabella emerged, one cloaked in delusion and denial. As the detectives tried to peel back the layers of her psyche, Isabella sat eerily calm, a stark contrast to the gruesome crime scene she was linked to. She adamantly refused to acknowledge her identity, insisting instead that her name was Samantha. This peculiar insistence was the first thread in a complex web of psychological intrigue. The interrogation grew increasingly intense as Isabella's responses veered further into the bizarre. Her eyes, once filled with the innocence of youth, now flickered with a confusing blend of fear and detachment. When asked direct questions about the events leading to her mother's death, she diverted, weaving elaborate stories that positioned her in places she couldn't possibly have been. Enter the experts, who watched hours of interrogation footage, analyzing Isabella's every word and gesture. Their task was formidable: to delve into the mind of a young woman who seemed to be retreating further into a fortress of her own making. According to Dr. Helen Pierce, a forensic psychologist, Isabella's refusal to accept her identity and her creation of the Samantha persona could be indicative of dissociative identity disorder, a condition often rooted in severe trauma. However, not all experts agreed on this diagnosis. Some suggested that her behavior could be an extreme defense mechanism, a calculated attempt to dissociate herself from the heinous act she is accused of. This theory posits that Isabella, overwhelmed by the gravity of her actions, subconsciously sought to distance herself from the crime, creating an alternate reality where she was merely an observer, not a perpetrator. The question then arises: was Isabella truly losing her grasp on reality, or was this a more sinister form of manipulation? The lines between truth and deception blurred as the interrogation continued, leaving more questions than answers. Was Isabella disassociating from her actions, or was there a deeper psychosis at play? As detectives dug deeper, the evidence began to paint a chilling picture. The search of Isabella Guzman's room unearthed a knife, its blade smeared with traces of DNA that matched both Isabella and her mother, Yoon Mi. This critical piece of evidence was further compounded by the discovery of injuries on Isabella's hands. Cuts and bruises that told a silent but violent story of a struggle. But the investigation did not stop at physical evidence. Detectives sifted through Isabella's personal effects and digital footprints, uncovering a trail of digital breadcrumbs that led to an even darker corner of this case. Among the cache of disturbing items was an email, sent from Isabella's account to a woman named Cecilia. The content was harrowing, filled with threats and expressions of a deep-seated hatred. It was as if Isabella's words were a window into her tumultuous inner world, one that harbored violent intentions. Further searches revealed more than just digital threats. In the back of her closet, hidden beneath layers of everyday clothes, were garments stained with blood. Not just any blood, but a genetic match to Yoon Mi. The presence of these blood-stained clothes tied Isabella directly to the brutal attack in a way that was undeniable. The accumulation of these findings, the DNA-laden knife, the incriminating emails, and the blood-stained clothes, were more than mere coincidences. They were irrefutable evidence linking Isabella to the heinous act against her mother. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, forming a narrative no one wanted to believe.